So here we go. There you go, portrait. Thank you, Ted. And Nick Sayers, everybody. Nick Sayers. So not only is this the first Bavard bar I've done after lockdown, this is actually the first public talk I've given after lockdown. So yeah, sort of like it's been a Bavard sandwich for me here. So I'm Nick Sayers. I'm an artist based in Brighton, and yeah, this is my project. So in 2017, I moved from Hove to Portslade in the sort of west of Brighton, and with my family. To this sort of 1930s terrace in the north of Portslade. And at the time, I was doing lots of, like I spoke about in the previous Bavard bar, I did lots of stuff with science and art. So I made drawing machines that I took to various different science events. This is one that allows you to trace around a human body, and you get like a sort of miniaturized drawing at the other end. And I've taken that to sort of music festivals. I even took it to Greece in 2019 when you could still travel. And so yeah, science events, and I did stuff with schools. So this is did a whole project making pinhole cameras and shooting 6-month exposure photographs of places around Brighton and around schools. So these are kids making pinhole cameras. And also took some of these projects abroad. So I mentioned Greece. This was in South Korea. I made a miniature suitcase-sized spirograph drawing bicycle that I took to Umsong and Seoul. And yeah, these are a group of very cute Korean kids playing with one of them. So yeah, so schools, science events, work abroad, and then this happened. And all those 3 sources of income and employment and fun and japes all came to a crashing end. This was Portslade around the sort of height of lockdown. This is like a normally busy sort of thoroughfare. Sort of like a sort of fairly major A road, and it was completely desolate. And you could hear birds singing, and there were sort of strangely sort of nice things about it. But also, I guess I was feeling as a visual artist that this was like a sort of also like a unprecedented time in history, and I sort of feel like I needed to respond to it in some way because I didn't have any work on anymore. So I thought. I should spend my time productively. So I kind of was thinking about when I was at A-level and art school, I got really into sort of drawing portraits of my friends in the common room when I wasn't doing any work. And so I've still got these like sketchbooks full of like people that I knew back in the sort of early 90s. So that was one thing. And then also this was again, like in 2019, I went on an amazing, this was the best gig ever. I was teaching origami on a cruise ship from from Dubai to Mumbai via Oman. And when I wasn't teaching Italians how to do origami, I kind of got, I just was sort of drawing people on board. So this is one of the entertainers. Lovely guy from Cuba. He was actually trying to chat me up, but we had a very nice portrait session, and I also drew the sort of the compere and the sort of musicians on stage and stuff. So I was kind of had this sort of like I was really wanting to get back into drawing, like traditional drawing, having sort of been a sculptor and sort of making sort of quite geometric, sort of scientific sort of art for years. And so I thought I could start drawing my neighbours and get, I'd only just moved to this part of town like a couple of years before. So I thought I could start, just make friends with my neighbours and draw them and sort of get to know their story by sort of having a chat while we did the portrait. And so the first person I drew was my next door neighbour Peter. He's had throat cancer, so he speaks with a sort of the thing that he's holding in his hand, which is like a sort of voice box thing. But it was fascinating to hear about his life. He's like in his mid-80s, and he's been living in our street for several years. He sort of told me about the sort of previous tenants of my house, it's fascinating. So the sort of idea sort of brewed that I'd need to talk from 2 meters away, so I sort of went around with a tape measure as well as my sketchbook and sort of measured out 2 meters from my subject. And it was just really nice to it was the sort of start of summer. We actually had a summer last year, you might remember, and it was actually quite summer lockdown I actually quite enjoyed. It was the winter one that wasn't so nice, but it was great to just be sitting out on people's terraces and sort of talking about life and the neighbourhood. Just as a bit of a sort of accident, the first sort of drawing tool that I picked up when I did this project was a biro, and it sort of proved to be quite a good choice, because I think if I had used pencil, I would have been very tempted to sort of like rub things out and just sort of be quite loose with it. But using a pen sort of forced me to commit to whatever line I was drawing, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But there was an intention there. Also, it just happened to scan very well for when I posted it on social media later on. So as well as drawing the portrait, I like to say, like, as well as being a drawn portrait, these were written portraits. So I'd write a little sort of like a little story about the conversation that we'd had during the portrait session. This was a particularly interesting one. This was a guy a few doors down from me who's a mortician. I can't remember what his wife did, but whenever she told me about what she did, I was like, tell me more about what you do as a mortician, to her husband. But actually, it was really nice. Actually, they were really freshly in love, and they were the only couple that I drew holding hands. It was really sweet. When I started, I was drawing things for people for free, and then I realised I couldn't really do that for much longer without sort of, because I needed to earn something. So I started asking for donations towards the project, and I gave 10% to NHS charities together. And so I pretty quickly ran out of people that I actually met in the street, and I during the summer months. Oh, there was a VE day, I think, or like a Jubilee, some sort of royal thing. And so there was people out on the street. So I chatted a few of them up there, and then by the end of it, I was like cold calling and putting flyers through people's doors to find new people. Oops. Also, being a massive geek, it was not long before I spreadsheeted it. So I wrote a very complicated set of sort of formula to work out who I'd drawn, who I hadn't, sort of age range, sort of gender balance, all that sort of stuff. But it was quite interesting, and also this square actually represents sort of people's interest in the project on the street. Incidentally, there was 96 houses. 96 houses, and there was no. As I was going down the street, there was no number between number 11 and number 15. Mine is a street with no number 13. So just a couple of examples. This guy on the left had a baby in April last year, and he was telling me how his parents hadn't been able to sort of touch their new grandchild, even though they lived very close by. And this guy on the right lives a couple of doors down from me, like next door to Peter, and he was born on the street, and he remembers using the cellars as bomb shelters during the war. And he was telling me how there's a lot of fruit trees on our street because it was a sort of market garden during the war. So that was another sort of aspect of the street, sort of like finding out about sort of local history in the street. So here's the 30 people I drew. Well, it's 30 households I drew. Some of them were couples as well. So yeah, it was quite a range as well. Like I sort of thought when I went into it that I'd sort of come up against someone who had like really objectionable views, or who was just really boring, and we'd just be sitting there in sort of awkward silence while I drew them. But it turns out that everyone's favourite subject is normally themselves. So yeah, everyone had a really interesting story to tell. There was everyone from sort of unemployed people to the guy with the baby was a sort of university optics researcher. All sorts of different people. Oh, and the mortician, of course. So yeah, youngest was this girl down here who was 9, and the oldest was I think 83, sort of top, laser pointer up there at the top. So I drew 30 of 96 houses on my street. Again, being a mathematician, if I'd just drawn 2 more, I could have drawn a third of the street, but it wasn't to be. And I tried again this year to sort of chat people up to sort of like get these 2 extras, but I think the sort of lockdown spirit had sort of worn very thin by that point, and people were not keen to sort of tell me about their lives on the street when they could be working. So then we had November lockdown last year, and it was too cold by this point to draw anyone else out on the street, and it just felt like it was a bit of a lonely, bitter, cold winter of lockdown ahead. So I thought, well, I'll switch to Zoom. So as a sort of bit of an experiment, I drew my friend Bella, who lives the other end of town from me, and I even drew her in sort of portrait format because I've been used to doing that with the street portraits. And it occurred to me that by Zoom I didn't have to be stuck to Brighton or even England. I could draw people all over the world. So I'd travelled quite a lot before lockdown. This is a sort of international art fair in a festival in Azerbaijan. So there's 20 artists from all different countries of the world. So I thought I'd sort of start with people that I'd met on my travels and draw them. So this is a guy I drew in Cairo from another art fair I went to in Sharm el-Sheikh in 2018. And so he was amongst the first of these drawings that I did. But once I'd gone through about 30, 35 people that I knew, it was on to people like they were sort of friends of friends of friends. I've actually drawn, I'll come on to that in another slide, but so I guess these are some of the really interesting sort of highlights. Iraq, I sort of was expecting her to come onto the camera wearing a burqa and sort of very sort of like sedate, but she was actually a sort of very cosmopolitan artist. She had lipstick on, she had sort of paintings she'd done of naked women on her walls, she was a musician. These guys these teenagers in the Marshall Islands, I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to draw them. Their country is no more than 100 metres across at any one point, so you can shout from one beach to the other, from one side of the country to the other. They were telling me about sort of in bringing girlfriends back home, and their mothers going, "Sorry, you can't go out with her, she's your cousin." Really interesting, sort of about living literally on like a coral reef, essentially. Croatia, I guess, really put sort of things in perspective. They've had 2 major earthquakes during lockdown. I spoke to someone else in Libya, and you could hear gunshots in the background. The guy in Azerbaijan, they'd been at war with Armenia over Nagorno-Karabakh, and had a sort of victory celebrations that became a super spreader event. So yeah, by comparison, we've got it fairly easy here. And then Bhutan, I think it's probably the longest portrait I drew. or the longest session, we talked for about 5 hours, and he sort of showed me outside his sort of temple, and he showed me the sort of Himalayas in the background, and like a sort of wooden bathhouse that he'd made on the sort of steps of the Himalaya mountains. It was just, it was just a real eye-opener. So this being Zoom, I also draw like the little selfie window as well. So I've now also drawn over 100 self-portraits of me in my little box room office with various stages of beard or sideburns or sort of like redecorating the house going on in the background. And here's 100 countries so far. I've drawn a few extras in America and China and South America and South Africa, and a couple of commissions as well. So here's the map as well. Again, being a bit of a Google sort of docs and maps geek, I've sort of been plotting where I've drawn each of these portraits, and so you can see the extra ones I've drawn around America. I'd like to add a few in sort of Australia, even though it's quite sparsely populated, just 'cause it's a very big country. Russia, I was thinking about sort of drawing someone in each different time zone. So yeah, just trying to sort of fill the gaps on the map. So you may wonder, and someone just asked, how I find people. It's got to the stage where I'm sort of like desperately sort of posting lists on social media now. So take a quick scan of that list, and if you know anyone, apart from in the crossed out countries, talk to me after the session. It'd be, I'm sort of running out of places to draw. It's getting sort of quite, it's getting trickier and trickier as I go on. With the neighbours, I was taking donations, giving 10% to NHS charities together. With this being an international project, I'm donating money to Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. Again, sort of who do work in sort of war zones and natural disasters around the world. So I've now drawn 101 of 197 countries in the world, but that number 197, it's weirdly close to 200, so I sort of feel like I sort of want to sort of just add a few more. So I'm thinking the Svalbard Arctic seed bank in the middle of, in the sort of Arctic Circle in the north, the British Antarctic Research Station, an astronaut from the International Space Station, and I'd get to 200. Anyway, that's my stretch goal for this project. So for sort of future plans for the project, I'd really like to get a book, sort of like a sort of coffee table book that you can sort of dip in and sort of, you know, one page will be Brazil, the next will be sort of Sweden, the next will be, you know, Suriname, so forth, like a sort of, like a bit like the way I've been doing the project. You know, one day I'll be drawing someone in one side of the earth, the next day I'll be drawing someone completely the other end of the earth. It's got me really used to sort of dealing with time zones. Sometimes I've really screwed it up as well. And also, when sort of real proper exhibitions happen again, I'd really like to get an exhibition published. So yeah, actually these are sort of two sort of inspirations for my project. This is Humans of New York, which is on social media and published now. And this is Human Eye, which is a sort of photographic project looking at people's skin tone and mapping it to Pantone colours. And I managed that in just about 15 minutes. First public talk in two years. Boom.